the problem that I see here is that it seems to me that there may well be some sort of a stitch-up going on between Trump and Putin with regard to the country of Ukraine. And you asked earlier what the British government should do. I think the first thing they should do is get their files out and have a look at history.
A very good evening to you. Great to have you with us this Easter Sunday. Carol Walker in for Aisha Hazarika until 7 o'clock this evening. A time now for my MP's panel. Lots to discuss this weekend. How should the government here respond to the latest developments in the war in Ukraine? The political reaction to that landmark ruling on the definition of a woman, the threat to the main parties from Reform UK, and the prospect of that elusive trade deal with the US as Rachel Reeves heads to Washington. With me tonight, Sir John Hayes, Conservative MP for South Holland and the Deepings, also chair of the Common Sense Group. Hello, John.
Hi.
How's your Easter weekend so far?
Well, I've been, obviously, Jesus has risen, hasn't he? So that's good news for all of us. And I was at church this morning, obviously with others recognising that fact and celebrating it, and I'm now with my family and we're about to have our family Easter meal.
And I'm sure roused by some of those wonderful Easter hymns. Seamus Logan is the SNP MP for Aberdeenshire North and Moray East. Seamus, hello.
Hello, Carol. Can I say, first of all, a very happy Easter to you and to all your listeners. I hope you're having a good day. It's quite a nice day here in the northeast of Scotland, and I hope the weather's the same everywhere.
Yeah, it's been fine. It's dry here in London. How's your Easter weekend?
Grand. We had a lovely family meal today, traditional Easter meal of roast lamb. So we're very lucky to have family around us and enjoying good food. There are many people who are not as fortunate as we are.
Well, thanks to both of you for joining us. We will also hopefully shortly have Kat Eccles, Labour MP for Stourbridge. Let's start with Ukraine. Russia and Ukraine have each accused the other of breaking that 30-hour Easter truce, which was announced by Russia's President Putin yesterday. President Zelensky of Ukraine says Russian shelling and drone activity actually increased this morning. Russia's Defence Ministry claimed Ukraine had launched hundreds of drone attacks. Earlier, I spoke to John E. Herbst, who is a former US ambassador to Ukraine, now senior director with the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Centre. He was not optimistic about the chances of this ceasefire achieving much.
Putin has violated pretty much every ceasefire which he has accepted in connection with the Russian war in Ukraine, which is over 11 years old. Putin was lying when he said a couple of days before he launched the big invasion that was merely an exercise. And sadly, we know that there are some senior officials in the United States government who think Putin is trustworthy. And they accept his statements at face value. And of course, his record sharply contradicts it. And that's kind of an embarrassment.
Well, Sir John Hayes, what do you make of what we're seeing here? Even that supposed brief truce does not seem to have materialised.
Truce depends on reciprocal trust. And that, of course, in itself depends on honouring commitments that have been made on both sides. And it's clear that there are profound problems with this truce on the basis you've just described. But at the end of the day, we've got to try and end this conflict. People on both sides are dying. Don't forget that many young Russian conscripts are dying, as well as civilians in Ukraine and civilian elsewhere. So it really is a very pressing imperative that we try to bring this to an end, just to save life, to end conflict. That's got to be what this is about.
And that's clearly what President Trump has been saying. But, I mean, Seamus, do you think that he has been too willing to accept the word of the Russian president?
Yes, I'm afraid so. Basically, I don't think that President Trump gets it. He just doesn't seem to understand that the security of Ukraine is European security and ultimately US security. He seems to have some sort of a misguided view that Putin can somehow be trusted or relied upon. And your piece a few moments ago confirms that Putin has a history of lying. He is not trustworthy. So, as Sir John said, and I agree with him, and your listeners might be surprised to find that Sir John and I agree on a number of things. We're good friends in the chamber, in fact. I completely agree with him that the focus, especially at this time of the year, has got to be on bringing about a ceasefire and ending the slaughter of so many young men and women, men and women of all ages in that conflict.
And Sir John, what do you think the British government's response should be? We've had just some brief words saying that what's needed is not just a 24 or 30-hour truce, but a real 30-day ceasefire to allow proper negotiations to proceed. What do you think the British government could and should be doing in this process?
Has more influence than sometimes we realise. We do occupy an important place in the European theatre, but also worldwide. The British influence is important too. So Britain can play a part in this, partly through our partnership with other nations. Of course, we can't do this alone. Our connection with Europe, but also our connection with the United States. I mean, if this special relationship means anything, then it certainly means something around defence and security. We work very closely with the Americans on security, as I know, my time as security minister and now on the ISC. So we've got to try and use that as leverage, I think, to get an outcome which is dependent on the kind of reciprocity I described earlier. And I think Seamus is right that that means not being naive about the partners involved. Putin does have the history that he describes, and so you have to be very hard-headed in this. We shouldn't underestimate Britain's ability to influence events through our soft power as well as our hard power in respect to security and defence. So I'd like to see Keir Starmer and David Lammy playing a key role here. There are discussions going on with America, of course, over trade. No doubt we'll talk about that later in the programme. It's a really good opportunity for us to use our leverage with America and in Europe. And I hope the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary will do so. And we wish them well in that, by the way. It's not about party politics. It's about actually getting the outcome that Seamus and I have both described, which is saving lives.
Yeah, and I mean, the problem with part of the problem with this, of course, is that President Trump himself is quite unpredictable. And Seamus, when you heard him say, as he did, that he might just take a pass, there was real concern that that might mean not just giving up on the efforts to try to broker a peace deal, but take a pass on the extent of the support that the US has been providing to Ukraine.
Well, you won't be surprised, Carol, to find that I'm not someone who pays that close attention to every single word that comes out of that man's mouth. One day he says this, the next day he says something else. The problem that I see here is that it seems to me that there may well be some sort of a stitch-up going on between Trump and Putin with regard to the country of Ukraine. And you asked earlier what the British government should do. I think the first thing they should do is get their files out and have a look at history and remember how Hitler-led Germany and a Stalin-led Russia carved up Poland in 1939 between them. And that was a dirty deal done between those two big powers. And I'm very concerned at the moment there is some kind of skulduggery afoot between President Trump and President Putin with regard to Ukraine. The key thing for me, Carl, is that Britain needs to stop trying to ride two horses here. What we need to do is to get closer to our European allies, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Poland. We can do this without the US. The European defense forces can be every bit as strong as anything that Russia can throw at us. And we don't need the US necessarily. So we need to get closer to Europe on these matters and stop trying to treat President Trump as some sort of reliable ally, because he's not.
Well, let me now bring in Kat Eccles, Labour MP for Stourbridge, who joins us now. Good afternoon, Kat.
Good afternoon, Carol.
Good to have you with us. When we look at what has been happening in Ukraine over the weekend. We had that surprise announcement of a supposed Easter truce by President Putin. But it appears that Russian attacks have continued. The Russians are saying that Ukrainian attacks have continued. Do you think this was all just a ruse by the Russian president?
Well, I think Putin has proven time and again that he can't be trusted. And as John has just said as well, that, I think we've got to be mindful of that fact that we know what he's done previously in history, and cozying up with President Trump, who we also know is someone we can't necessarily trust. So while I understand that our Prime Minister wants to try and maintain the special relationship with America, which of course is important, I think we need to be realistic about what these characters are like. And I would suggest as well that it is sensible to be aligning ourselves closer with Europe for that defence, for our defence allies, and ensuring that we've got people on our side as and when we need it.
Well, Kat, do you think then that the Prime Minister should be saying to President Trump, should be warning him not to get too close to President Putin, telling him not to believe what the Russian leader's telling him?
Gosh, I think anyone trying to tell President Trump what to do is and expecting him to listen is possibly slightly deluded, because again, we've seen that Donald Trump will do what Donald Trump wants to do, regardless. So while we do need to keep these people on side where we can, we have got to be aware of what they're capable of, and particularly with Trump, with how unpredictable he can be. I mean, look what he's been doing with the global markets over the past couple of weeks. I think, he's so unpredictable that he can't be relied upon. And I think if anyone tried to tell him, move away from Putin, he would probably move closer.
Well, do you agree with Seamus Logan that? Just one more thought from Kat, and then I'll come back to you, John. Kat, do you agree with Seamus Logan that President Trump can no longer be considered a reliable ally?
That would be my personal thought, although I completely appreciate that as a country and a government that we need to try and nurture that relationship, if at all possible, and try and keep it going, and just trying to do what's right by our country and by the rest of Europe and Ukraine.
John Hayes, were you trying to come in there?
Yeah, I was just going to say that we shouldn't underestimate our power in this. You'll remember that when the Ukraine conflict began, when the invasion happened, Britain took a disproportionately active role in framing the European and indeed the Atlantic response to that. I mean, Boris Johnson gets a lot of stick, and I'm not going to comment on all that or go down that particular rabbit hole. But at the time, Britain really did lead Europe in being robust in resisting Russia's overtures and indeed their actions in respect to Ukraine. So we do have that power. And just on the American thing, as I said earlier, our most important security relationship is with the USA. I mean, the Five Eyes, which of course is the core security relationship we have across Canada, New Zealand, Australia, Britain and America, is critical, and the Americans know that. So we do have influence here. The Prime Minister will be well aware of that. I know he takes great interest in security issues, and I think we should exercise and use that, as I said, as leverage. I accept.
Well, what do you think, John? Well, what do you think, John, of what Kat Eccles was saying, as well as Seamus Logan, that actually we should be forging a much closer relationship with the European Union and using our European allies to bolster Ukraine?
Yeah, I mean, it's not really the European Union as much as European neighbours, because, of course, a lot of security issues are unrelated to the European Union as an entity. But they're both right. They're not mutually exclusive. We do have to have a pan-European and a pan-Atlantic relationship here. NATO is framed around that relationship. I know there are doubts about what President Trump thinks about NATO, but nonetheless, it is important that we use as much influence as we can to build those bridges with America and with Europe to get a consistent, coherent unified response. It won't be easy. Seamus is right and Kat's right. That is not going to be easy with all the unpredictability that emanates from the United States at the moment.
Maybe
We've
I
got
can
to do
come
our
in.
best to achieve it.
Seamus.
Yeah, so I have a great deal of respect for Kat, his former NHS worker like myself, and I just wanted to point out, perhaps to Sir John as well, this concept of the special relationship. Surely to goodness people can see that that is really old hat now. This is a country that put the UK in trade terms on the same par as an island with penguins. So we really have to wake up and smell the coffee. The concept of a special relationship is pretty much dead and gone.
Well, Kat, just your thoughts on that. Do you think the special relationship is dead?
I don't think it is dead, and I can understand why Seamus has said that, why he feels that way. But ultimately, I think it's a battle that we've got to break down Trump and try and appeal to his better nature because of his unpredictability. And I think if there was someone else sitting in the White House, then we'd probably be thinking we had a much better special relationship. I think in terms of security and in terms of trade as well, we have got to try and foster something there until it feels like there's nothing to foster.
OK, Kat Eccles, Sir John Hayes and Seamus Logan, do stay with us. Lots more to discuss this afternoon here on Times Radio.